Chapter 9. Swept Away. For a long time I had no memory of that fatal afternoon. My mind locked it in a dark closet and threw away the key. As hard as it is to believe, I even forgot Robert's name. I was lying comfortably in his arms and he turned the sailboat toward the shore. The cove was small, with just a patch of beach really, but he had discovered it and claimed it our special place. When we drew closer, I sat up. The wind had grown a bit stronger and the clouds flowing from the south now looked a bit darker and thicker. I should have said, "Let's go back, Robert," right then and there, but I didn't. I, too, was hungry for love, and I, too, was titillated by the prospect of our own private little world. Robert leaped out of the sailboat and guided it onto the shore. Then he reached for my hand and I stepped out. He found a piece of driftwood nearby and planted it in the sand, and then he tied his handkerchief upon it, and so it flapped in the wind like a flag. "I claim this beach for Laura Logan and hereby name it Laura's Cove," he said, standing proud and strong like some historic explorer. I laughed and clapped my hands. He took a sweeping bow and I laughed again. Everything made me laugh that afternoon. All of it. The air. The freedom, the renewal of love and the promises had made me giddy. I was drunk on dreams. "We have to christen our place of paradise," he declared and stepped up to me. He embraced me and kissed me. The wind whipped my hair and the sea spray felt cool and refreshing on my arms and neck. "I missed you," he said. "Oh, how I missed you." "I kissed you 1,000 times in my mind, Laura. I held you every chance I could get." He kissed me softly on the tip of my nose and then the chin, and before we joined lips again. After that, he reached into the sailboat and pulled out a blanket. He spread it out and we embraced and lowered ourselves onto the sand. I laid back against his chest. "We can't stay long," I remember saying. "Carrie and May." "I know," Robert replied and stroked my hair, running his palm over my cheek, as if he were blind and committing every feature to my face to his memory forever and ever. I wanted him. Oh, how much I wanted him. He sensed my desire and began to kiss me on my neck. His hands moved over my waist and gently pushed up my tank top. In moments we were both nearly undressed, embracing, clinging to each other, as if the whole world had become water and we were floating on its surface. "I will not let anyone take you from me," he whispered, "even for a short time." His words filled my heart and drove away the doubts about our love, about myself, about what and who we were. "Yes," I heard myself begin somewhere deep inside my soul. "Yes, yes, yes." Our kisses were long, the kisses of two people who had been locked away from that love for too long. I don't even remember how we came totally naked, but we were, and without hesitation, almost without skipping a beat, we were making love, throwing all caution to the wind that whirled around us. It began with a maddening rush and then slowed into an undulating rhythm that took me up and down to the heights of ecstasy in the moments of quiet when I could catch my breath. But soon the hunger for another taste of ecstasy overpowered me, and I tightened my embrace around him, refusing to permit it to end. I remember hearing his small laugh of delight and seeing his face, his eyes full of so much love. I told myself what we're doing couldn't be anything but good and beautiful. We rode on each other's passion until we were exhausted. He slid off me and laid beside me, his face against the blanket, but his eyes on me. I turned and looked into his eyes, into his beautiful, smile of contentment. I love you, Laura, he said. I love you too, Robert. He put his arm over my shoulder, lay his palm against my naked back, and closed the distance between us. We lay there quietly, our eyelids fluttering, suddenly feeling heavy. We both decided to just rest a little while, and then, like some magic spell, sleep washed over us, and we both drifted. I was the first to wake up. The wind had picked up considerably, spitting sand and water over us. I turned quickly, and when I looked up, I saw only a low, dark clouds whirling around us. Seconds later, I felt the raindrops, but the worst, most terrifying sight was the sailboat drifting away. In our haste, we hadn't beached it securely. It was a good 10 to 15 feet from the shore already. Robert, I screamed. He opened his eyes and sat up quickly. Oh no, the boat! We have to get it before it gets washed out too far, I cried. He leaped to his feet and dove in the water, swimming as hard as he could to the boat. The waves were already at least 2 feet high. He struggled and he reached the side of the sailboat, heaving himself up and over. The sail was flopping hard, the small mast swinging from right to left. Robert struggled to get hold of the line, but when he tightened the sail against the wind, the small boat began to turn over, and he didn't let go fast enough. It looked like it jumped out of the water, spilling him into the ocean as it capsized. Robert! I was a good swimmer, but not strong enough to battle those waves for long. It took a monster effort, nearly exhausting me, but I managed to reach the boat quickly. I grabbed hold of the boat and called Robert again. He surfaced on the other side of the boat, looking dazed. It wasn't until he swam toward me that I saw why. When he tumbled into the sea, with the boat following after him, some part of it struck him on the head. A thin but steady stream of blood trickled from under his hair, down on his temple and over his cheek. Robert, you're hurt, I cried. He nodded, but he still looked confused. We bobbed with the boat as the waves grew higher and stronger. The wind was intensifying too. The rain became stringily sharp and cold. I looked back at the shore. All of our clothing, the blanket, everything was being washed by the tide and slowly sucked into the sea. The shock of it all happening so quickly panicked me. I struggled with the boat in a vain and fruitless attempt to right it. Robert was just bobbing, holding onto the side, either unsure of how to right the boat or so confused he hadn't even thought to try. Climb over the hole, Robert, and start to pull the boat upright. Climb, I cried. Robert, do it now. We're being swept out further and further. Finally, he seemed to understand. He pulled himself up and reached for the side of the boat, using his weight to turn it upright. He didn't weigh enough and he wasn't strong enough, so I joined him quickly as I could, and both of us pulled desperately as the wind whipped against our backs like cold, wet rope, and the rain became a torrential downpour, blinding us. More desperate, frantic, realizing the danger fully, we gave it all our might and the boat began to turn over. Robert was too excited by our small success and jerked wildly at the hole. "Just let it turn, Robert," I screamed, but he continually leaping up and down, pulling and grunting, defeating his own efforts. Finally, the mast came in. The wet sail came out of the water. We were doing fine. We would get it upright, I thought. We'll be all right. Then another heavy, fierce gust of wind lashed at us, and I lost my grip, sliding back into the sea. The boat began to turn over again, and Robert lunged with all his strength to prevent it from happening. I saw him fly over with the boat and disappear on the other side. We were at least 20 feet from the shore by now. The rain was falling so hard I could barely make out the tiny patch of beach. "Robert," I called, and I didn't see him. "Robert, where are you? Robert!" He didn't respond, and he didn't swim back to me. I kept my grip on the hull, and I fought my way around the boat. At first I didn't see him, and then I saw his head just under the surface, his head floating toward the mast. I moved as quickly as I could, taking hold of the mast, then his hand, and pulling him with all my might until his head appeared. His eyes were glassy, dazed. There was a wider, faster stream of blood now on his temple and cheek. I thought he mouthed my name and smiled, but it was hard to see clearly in the salt water, burning my eyes and the rain pounding on my face. I held on to him. He seemed incapable of moving on his own. His right arm never came out of the water, and his head slowly lowered to his shoulder and his eyes closed. "Robert!" I tried pulling him closer, but I was losing my grip on the mast. The water had made it slippery and difficult to hold. If I didn't let go of Robert's hand soon, I might lose my grip completely and get washed out to sea with him, I thought. My shoulders ached, my neck muscles screamed, and my hand felt as if it was being torn off my wrist. "Oh, Robert, wake up! Help us, Robert!" He bobbed with the waves that took us up and down. When I turned and looked back, I saw we were out of sight of the shore. The ocean was sweeping us away. I remember thinking about Carrie, expecting him to appear at any moment in another boat, flying over the waves, coming to our rescue. He would be angry, but very, very worried. He would scoop us both out of the sea and wrap us in warm blankets and get us home. "Please hurry, Carrie," I moaned, "please." I held on to the mast and to Robert's hand, but the weight of his body was pulling my wrist and arm. His fingers lost their grip on mine, and he started to slip away. "Robert, oh Robert, wake up," I pleaded. I thought about shaking his arm, but I was afraid the motion might cause him to lose the tennis grip. I still held on to the mast. The ocean water hit my face while I was calling him, and I swallowed too much. I gagged and coughed and choked and felt myself losing grip on Robert, and I struggled to hold on to him. I couldn't let go. New England weather, I thought, famous for its quick changes. I should have known. I should have known better. It's my fault. My fault. The ocean was relentless. It would not be denied its sacrifice. I made a desperate last effort to hold on to Robert and the mast, and I felt his fingers slide over my palm. His body lifted in the waves as if he were rising up to say his last goodbye, and then he went under. I yelled his name as hard and as long as I could. I started to let go of the mast to search for him, but my own desperation to survive wouldn't permit my fingers to loosen their grip. I know I screamed and shouted his name until my voice gave out. My throat ached, and then I closed my eyes and turned to put my other hand around the mast. I pulled myself closer to it and laid my cheek against the cold metal. The boat continued to bob, to rise and fall in the wind and rain. A deep and thick darkness fell over me. Even when I opened my eyes, I saw nothing. The last thing I thought was silly in the light of what was happening and what had happened. I moaned and cried. I lost that beautiful silk scarf Mommy gave me. I'm sorry, Mommy, I cried. My body shook as much with my own sobs as it did from the cold water and freezing rain. I lie there with my head resting against the mast, and I felt the hole on my left side. I was reassuring. I remember thinking, I'll just sleep for a moment and then the storm will stop. The magic will return. The sun will warm us. We'll laugh again and make promises to each other again. Won't we? I couldn't remember his name. I could see his face, see his smile, even hear his voice, but who was he? And then the worst terror of all struck me. Who am I? I have to put together what happened next, working over the time of events, the vague memories, the words I had heard, as if it were all a part of some grand 1,000-piece puzzle. Some of what was told to me later on, but I always had to measure what I remembered against what I was told. The storm continued to build that afternoon, preventing any real search for us. The wind and the waves carried the overturned sailboat further out to sea. A fisherman by the name of Carl Hansen was fighting his way back to shore. He had worked for Grandpa Samuel and Grandma Olivia for years, but was pretty much retired now, only venturing out now and again with his own net. He saw the overturned sailboat and drew close enough to spot me clinging desperately to the mast. He began to shout. I remember first thinking that the wind had found a voice. I thought it was part of the magic and just listened with a small smile on my face. My eyes closed and he called and called. Then I felt something hit my shoulder and I opened my eyes to see a man tossing a net my way as his boat bobbed in the rough seas. "Take hold, wrap it around you," he ordered, yelling through cupped hands. "Take hold." He threw the net again and again. Each time I looked at it but didn't move. I couldn't let go of the mast. My hands had locked around it, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't will my hands to reach out for the net he threw. Finally, Mr. Hansen brought the boat closer. Until he was able to leap into the sea. He had a thick rope tied to his waist when he reached me and quickly untied himself and wound the rope around me. "You've got to let go," he said. "Don't worry, I'll get you to my boat." He was a short, stout man with full gray beard. I should have recognized him, but I didn't. He recognized me. "Laura Logan," he cried. "Mrs. Logan's granddaughter? Sweet Mary and Joseph. Let go of that mask when I tell you, girl." I remember I screamed and tried to resist the effort. Then finally he got me to free, and I swam, and he swam back to his boat, towing me behind him. The wind was furious, the rain unrelenting. The struggle was getting to be too much for him. His own boat was in danger. I'm sure he questioned whether he could continue, but he did. Finally we reached the boat, and Mr. Hansen was able to lift me quickly and swing me on board. I was naked and freezing, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they would shatter against each other. The waves were tossing in Mr. Hansen's boat mercilessly. He had to get it back in control. He found a blanket and threw it over me, and then attended the boat. We went farther out until he found calm water to give him a chance to tend to me. He returned and helped me into the cabin, where there was a small cushioned bench. "What happened to you, girl? How'd you get caught out here? Where's your brother?" Brother, I thought. I have a brother? I didn't respond. I lie there, going in and out of consciousness. I don't remember how long it took for us to reach shore, but he made a tactical navigation decision and brought us to Grandpa Samuel and Grandma Olivia's dock. The wind had let up some and the rain had slowed. The next thing I knew, Mr. Hansen was running for help. He returned to get me out of the boat and then literally carried me in the house. A small, angry woman greeted us and directed him to bring me into the guest room downstairs, where he sat me gently on the bed. The elderly lady stood behind him waiting. I didn't know who she was then. All I saw was her face of rage as she glared down at me. It all seemed to be happening to someone else. It was as if I was watching a movie. "Where did you find her?" I heard her ask. "She was clinging to an overturned sailboat about 1.5 miles from Dead Man's Cove," he replied. "Those things are too small for weather only half as bad as this." "You found her by herself then?" "Yes, ma'am." "I hope her brother wasn't out there with her," he said. "No one could survive that," he added. "It wasn't her brother," she said. "She was naked when you found her?" "Yes, ma'am." "Disgusting," she muttered. I was so cold I couldn't move my arms or legs. I laid curled up in a ball, breathing heavily, my body shuddering. She drew closer. "What were you doing out there, girl?" she demanded, glaring at me with those cold eyes of steel. I couldn't talk. I couldn't even shake my head. "Something sinful, just as I predicted," she concluded, nodding. "I'll get my search party up after this dies down," Carl Hansen said. The old woman spun around. "You'll do nothing of the kind, Carl," she snapped at him. "You won't mention a word of this." "But surely there was someone else on that boat, Mrs. Logan." "I know there was someone else. I'm sure he was naked too," she added disdainfully. "It's not something I want anyone else to know," she said, nodding at me. "The both of them were caught in some sinful act." "What sinful act?" I wanted to say, but I couldn't. She turned back to him. I saw the look of surprise and confusion on his face, but I didn't understand why. I didn't know where I was, and I'd forgotten how I had even gotten there. All I knew is I was cold, and no one seemed to be paying attention to that. "You never found her, Carl," she told him. "I need your word on that." "Pardon, Miss Logan?" "You never found her," she said firmly. "Leave it all to me now." "But Mrs. Logan..." "You will be handsomely rewarded for your loyalty to me, Carl. I know your wife is sick and you've been having a hard time making ends meet. You won't have to worry at all about her doctor bills anymore, and anything else for that matter. As long as I could rely on your word, she added. He gazed at me, and then at the small, angry woman he called Mrs. Logan. Well, I suppose there's nothing more to do about this, really. You'll see to her and whoever else is out there. Well, God rest his poor soul, Carl Hansen said. I'm sure he didn't survive. There's nothing we could do anyway except locate the body, and there's no rush to do that. Exactly. Now remember, Carl, you never found her. You just make your own way toward the shore and got washed up here. Is that hard enough for you? Yes, it was, ma'am. That was. There's no lying about that. Precisely, she said. Raymond will see that you get home, and I'll have something for you in the morning. I'll also see that Ruth gets the personal nursing care she requires. Well, thank you, Mrs. Logan. That's very kind. As long as we understand each other, Carl, she added, her small eyes very cold and threatening. He nodded quickly. Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Logan, absolutely. Good, she said and turned back to me. Good. She escorted him out and then returned in a few minutes later. She simply stood there gazing down at me. How could you do this? She demanded. How could you deliberately lie and deceive me and do this? My teeth chattered and I moaned. Do you have the slightest concern for this family? Do you know what kind of disgrace this could bring? Why, they even put this in the newspaper. People from outside Providencetown, friends, acquaintances from everywhere could learn of it. Well, do you have anything to say? I'm cold, I finally said. Cold. That's the least of your problems. Fortunately, Mr. Hansen won't tell anyone a thing, but... Don't you hear a word of what I'm saying to you, she snapped. You're staring at me as if I was speaking in Greek. And wipe that silly smile off your face, she ordered. I won't have it. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not smiling. I'm just cold. My hair is soaked, I said. I started to rub the blanket up and down my arms and legs. I'm sure you're sorry now. Although it does us no good to have to say it, she said and wagged her head. How did this happen? What? I asked. What, are you an idiot? This, she exclaimed, thrusting her hands towards me. You've lived here long enough to know that not to go out in a storm and to be cautious. What were you doing out there? Were you so wrapped up in your lust that you ignored the weather? Well, out where? In the ocean, you fool. What's wrong with you? Then I remember giggling. I couldn't help it. She was a funny little old lady to me. Her hair was held tightly back with pearl combs, and she wore a flower print dress with a rope of pearls around her neck. When she got excited, the blood under her skin rose up to her neck like mercury in a thermometer, and she seemed to bounce on her feet after every sentence. You think this is funny? She asked, astounded. I shook my head. What happened to him? She asked. To who? I responded. She stopped being angry for a moment, then stared intently at me. Don't you remember anything? I shook my head. You know where you are, don't you? Again I shook my head. She stared and then tilted her head a little as she thought. What's my name? She suddenly asked. That man called you Mrs. Logan, I said. Isn't that your name? My God. She covered her mouth and stared at me. Then she lowered her hand slowly. What's your name? I thought, but no name came to mind. I don't know. She stepped back as if I had some contagious disease and stared at me again. Madness on top of disgrace. It's happening again. First to my sister and now to you. I'm supposed to bear the burden, face the community, and hold my prestige and position, and keep this family's name respected as it once was and should be. She paused and raised her small fist toward the ceiling as if she were threatening God. This will not happen, she declared. Then she turned back to me. Don't you move from that bed, she ordered. I didn't think I could move. I had just barely managed to straighten my legs. Minutes later, she returned with an armful of big, fluffy towels and then went into the bathroom. I heard her run the tub. She was moving quickly. She looked like a goblin to me, and I couldn't keep from smiling again. It made her angry when she emerged from the bathroom and saw the smile on my face. "Get up," she ordered. "I'll handle this myself. Go on, get up." I swung my legs out slowly, the muscles in my thighs screaming. Then when I pushed to sit up, I felt my shoulder stinging. The blanket fell away. I looked at my arm. Blood vessels had burst all along it. And there was black and blue marks on the inside of my wrist, up to my elbow, right to my shoulder. Even she gasped. "Everything hurts," I complained. "And rightly so," she said, regaining her regal, stern demeanor. "Stand up and walk into that bathroom. Go on. I don't have the strength to lift you," she added, her hands on her hips. I realized she had put on a little blue housecoat over her dress. I tried to stand, but my legs wobbled. "I can't," I moaned. "You can and you will. Stand," she ordered. She reached forward and seized the top of my hair, tugging me hard. I screamed. The breath nearly left me, but I rose. I reached out to brace myself on her shoulder. She stepped back, at least gave me her hand. "I can't carry you. Walk," she commanded. Each step was excruciating. My back, my legs, even my feet ached. I made my way toward the sound of running water, reached out to steady myself against the door jamb, and then I entered the bathroom. She moved ahead and shut off the water. "Get into that tub and soak yourself. Go on. Do what I say and do it now," she ordered again. I don't know how I did it, but I reached the tub and lifted my leg to step in the water. It was so hot, however, I howled and I pulled my foot out quickly, losing my balance, and fell back and sat on the hard floor. "You're disgusting," she cried. "It's too hot," I moaned. "It has to be hot, you fool. Now get up and get in the water. Go on, do it." She hovered over me. "If you don't, you'll get pneumonia." I got to my knees and crawled in the tub, and I took a deep breath and put my foot in again. I took it out, and I grew so dizzy I thought I would faint. She put her hands on my hips and held me steady, permitting me to rest against her for a moment. "All right, now lower yourself into the water. Just do it quickly," she commanded. I took a deep breath and did so, crying out, and I settled into the steamy liquid. My body began to itch and then tingle. I kept taking deep breaths. Finally, I grew more comfortable, and then it did suddenly make me feel better. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, I felt something being poured over my head. "You have to wash out the salt," she said, and she scooped the water onto my hair, scrubbed it, and then forced me to lower myself until I was under the water so I could rinse my hair. She kept me down so long I thought she wanted to drown me in the tub. I came up gasping. "Just lie there and soak," she said, and left the bathroom. I'm sure I fell asleep for a few minutes, then I sensed her nearby again. She returned and stood over me, looking down with an expression of utter disgust. "Well," she demanded, "do you know who you are now?" I thought, and then I shook my head. "I don't know," I wailed. "Who am I?" "You're a fool, and I don't suffer fools in this family anymore," she declared. She sighed deeply. "Who am I?" I tried to remember. I had even forgotten what the man called me before. "I don't remember what that man called me, and called you," I moaned. "What's your brain turned into, cranberry jelly?" she asked. "Cranberries. I remember cranberries." "Well, I'm glad about that. What else do you remember? Do you have a family? Friends?" I thought, and just found a blank, dark place in my mind with no faces, no words, no voices. I shook my head. "I don't know," I said. She stared. "Maybe you don't. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise." "Yes," she said, her face lighting up and her eyes widening. "It is." She left me again for what seemed like quite a long time. When she returned this time, she had a white terry cloth robe in her hands. Get out, dry yourself off and put this on, she said. Someone will be here for you soon. Someone? Good, I thought. There was someone. Surely I would remember everything soon. I crawled up and out of the tub with great effort. My body was beyond exhaustion. Muscles working on their own memory and not my commands. It seemed to take me forever to dry myself off. She grew impatient. For God's sake, she said, seize one of those towels. She began to rub me vigorously. I felt as if my skin would peel away. My every movement was filled with pain and I ached everywhere. There, she said, now put on that robe and return to bed, she instructed. I did what she said. The moment my head hit the pillow and I closed my eyes, I fell asleep. I woke when I heard voices above me. My eyelids refused to stay open at first, and then, with stubborn effort, I did get them to do so. Coming into focus was a tall woman in a starched white uniform. She stood next to the small elderly lady. The woman in white scrutinized me for a moment, then made a small tight smile. Hello, my name is Clara. What's your name? She asked, and took my wrist into her fingers to feel for my pulse. My name's... I can't remember, I cried. The woman looked at the elderly woman, then back at me. Do you know whose home you're in? I shook my head. How old are you? I don't know. How did you get here? She followed quickly. I don't remember. Where am I? Are you home? Am I? See, the elderly lady said. Yes, it's classic, I think, the woman in white said. Her pulse is strong. It's not her pulse I'm worried about, the small elderly lady said. Clara nodded. You understand what I want and how I want it done, the elderly lady said. Precisely. You've made the appropriate calls, I imagine? Of course, the elderly lady said. It's all arranged. I'm relying on your discretion. You'll be rewarded, she added. Clara smiled. You won't be disappointed. Good. Clara turned back to me. I'm going to help you now, she said, but I need you to help yourself too, okay? Yes, I said. Good. I want you to get up and walk with me. We're going to go into the car outside. I'm going to take you to a nice place, okay? Okay, I said. I raised myself up on my elbows and Clara reached under my left arm and helped me get out of bed. When I stood up, I felt terribly stiff and said so. That's all right, Clara said. You won't be stiff much longer. I'll help you, she said. She smiled. She had a nice, friendly smile, a much nicer smile than the elderly lady could ever have, I thought. I was glad to be leaving. The elderly lady followed behind us as we continued out of the room, down the long corridor and the front doors of the house. I remember thinking it was a big house and there were things in it that looked familiar, but I didn't remember coming here. The elderly lady walked ahead of us and opened the door. It was still slightly drizzling, and the cold air hit me like a slap in the face. I shuddered, and Clara wrapped her arm around my shoulders. There now, she said. We'll be warm soon. She guided me out to the dark car that was waiting. I didn't see the driver. Clara opened the door, and I was guided carefully into the rear of the car. Then Clara stepped back. You want to say anything to her, Clara? Asked the elderly lady. No, tell them I'll be there tomorrow to make arrangements and give them a check, she said. Very good, Mrs. Logan. I snapped my head around. Mrs. Logan. I remembered that name, but who was she? She glared at me, her eyes beady, icy, her mouth pinched tight. I was glad when the door was closed and she was out of sight. Clara got in from the other side and sat beside me. All right now, she asked. I nodded. You'll be fine, she said. Soon you'll be fine. I smiled back at her. She nodded at the driver and the car began to leave the big house in the rain into the darkness that lay ahead. I stared a moment and spun around and looked back, but the lights of the house were already gone and the darkness had closed in behind me. It was as if I had walked through a door and the other had been shut so tight. I wanted to go back. I wanted to open the door again, but I couldn't find my way. Where are we going? I asked Clara. Someplace else, she replied. Is that okay? I thought for a moment. Yes, I said, it's okay. I wasn't sure why, but vaguely I realized that yes, it was better to be someplace else.